All stories are dramatized recreations. Named locations are fictionalized. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental.
The scent of antiseptic and anxious animal is my world's baseline perfume. It's the smell of control, of purpose. My hands, currently buried in the soft, trusting fur of a geriatric golden retriever named Buddy, know this language intimately. They can find a tumor, suture a wound, calm a racing heart. They are capable and sure. But right now, as I press the stethoscope to Buddy's chest, listening to the steady, thrumming beat of his loyal heart, all I can feel is the phantom weight of a flimsy piece of paper in my own pocket, a slip that has made my capable hands tremble for 2 days straight. It's a receipt from a place called La Canzone Italiana, dated 2 weeks ago, for $187.54. I found it on Tuesday, not in his wallet, not in his jeans pocket, but in the cup holder of his car. Christopher's car, a sleek, black sedan that always smells of his expensive cologne and coffee. I was driving it because my SUV was in the shop for new brakes, and he'd taken my older, less prestigious car to work. "No point both of us being uncomfortable, Vic," he'd said, smiling that easy smile that used to make my knees weak. I'd needed to run an emergency errand for a specific antibiotic we were out of at the clinic, and his car was there. The errand was forgettable. The moment my fingers closed around the crumpled paper in the dark recess of the cup holder was not. La Canzone Italiana, I'd never heard of it. A quick search on my phone, right there in the driver's seat, revealed an intimate, dimly lit Italian place in a part of Denver we never frequent. A romantic hideaway, the reviews gushed. Perfect for anniversaries. Our anniversary was 6 months ago. We went to a steakhouse. The logic, the cold, clinical part of my brain that diagnoses parvo and distinguishes between benign and malignant, tried to assemble the facts. A business dinner, a client with a taste for overpriced pasta, a lost receipt from months ago just now surfacing, but the numbers wouldn't add up. The date was a Thursday. A Thursday he'd told me he was working late, crunching numbers for a quarterly review. He'd come home at 10, smelling of coffee and exhaustion, and kissed my forehead. I'd made him a plate of leftovers, $187.54. For two, that seemed excessive for a business meal. For one, absurd. My mind, treacherous and sharp, itemized it. 2 entrees, a bottle of wine, perhaps dessert. Buddy shifts under my hands, letting out a soft whine. "I know, Buddy, almost done," I murmur, my voice steady, a professional calm overlaying the seismic shift happening inside me. This is my skill, this compartmentalization. I can hold a dying animal in my arms and offer it peace while my own heart is shattering. I can smile at a grieving owner while my own world is collapsing. I am a vault of other creatures' pain, and now my own has joined the collection, locked behind a steel door. I finish Buddy's exam, my movements autopilot. "He's doing great, Mrs. Gable," I say, and the words are the right words in the right order with the right gentle smile. "Just keep him on the joint supplements. He's a good boy." I escape the room, the receipt a burning brand against my thigh. Back in my small, sterile office, I lean against the closed door. The framed photos on my desk mock me. Christopher and me on our wedding day, his face young, his eyes full of a promise that now feels like a lie. Christopher and me with our son, Liam, at the zoo last summer, all of us squinting in the sun, a perfect tableau of family happiness. 11 years. 11 years of building a life, a home, a family, of believing in the solidity of us. He is Christopher, my husband. The man who remembers I hate cilantro, who brings me coffee in my favorite mug every morning, who holds my hand during scary movies. He is the father of my child. He is the constant. But he is also the man who had a $187 dinner at a romantic Italian hideaway on a night he claimed to be eating a sad desk salad. The old flame theory, one I dismissed as paranoid melodrama months ago when he'd started mentioning her name a little too often in casual conversation, now rears its ugly head. Sarah. Sarah from college. She'd moved back to Denver for a job. "It's crazy running into her after all these years," he'd said, his tone light, effortless. "We should have her over for dinner sometime." We never did. My phone buzzes, a text from him, "Hey Vic. Picking up Liam from soccer practice tonight. Don't worry about dinner, I'll grab us some pizzas. Love you. Love you. 2 words that now feel like a placeholder, empty and automated. A line in a script he's been following while living a different story entirely. I don't text back. I can't. The vault door inside me is straining, and I can hear the chaos behind it. The screaming, the crying, the raw, animalistic hurt. But here, in my office, surrounded by charts for spays and neuters and vaccination schedules, I am still Dr. Victoria Thorne. I am still in control. I straighten up. I walk to my desk. I open the drawer and take out a fresh file. My hands are not trembling anymore. They are cold and still. I place the receipt, carefully smoothed out, on the blotter. It is evidence. It is a symptom, and I am a diagnostician. The first cut is the deepest, they say, but this doesn't feel like a cut. It feels like the air pressure changing before a storm. It feels like the moment of absolute silence before the avalanche breaks loose. I am standing in my quiet, orderly life, looking at a tiny piece of paper, and I can hear the whole world starting to crack. The smell of pepperoni and cheap cardboard boxes filled the house, a scent that usually spelled comfort, a lazy Friday night with a movie. Tonight, it smelled like a lie. Everywhere. Liam chattered away, a stream of excited commentary about soccer practice, about the goal he almost saved, about the pizza he was devouring. And then Coach said I almost had it. Dad saw, right, Dad? Christopher, sitting across from me at our familiar oak table, nodded, a easy smile on his face. He looked the part of the perfect father, the devoted husband. He'd even gotten my favorite, green olives and mushrooms. A peace offering he didn't know he needed to make. Or did he? Was this the guilt? The overly attentive with gifts the randomization had promised. That's great, buddy, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, tinny and distant, as if I were listening to myself from the bottom of a well. I hadn't eaten a single slice. The cheese had congealed into a greasy, rubbery film on top of my pizza. I watched Christopher's hands. Those hands I knew so well. The scar on his thumb from a long-ago cooking accident. The way he gestured with a slice of pizza when he talked to Liam, making him laugh. They were the same hands that had, presumably, held a menu at La Canzone Italiana. That had perhaps poured wine for someone else. The receipt was in my pocket. It felt like it was glowing, radiating a cold heat that seeped through my jeans into my skin. "You're quiet tonight, Vic," Christopher said, his eyes finally landing on me, crinkling at the corners with a concern that made my stomach twist. "Tough day at the clinic." "You have no idea," I thought. I diagnosed a beagle with diabetes, a parrot with anxiety-induced feather plucking, and my marriage with terminal infidelity. "Just a long one," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in glass. "Liam, honey, why don't you take your plate into the living room? You can start the movie. Dad and I will be in soon." Liam, thrilled by the breach of the no food in the living room rule, didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled away, a trail of pizza crumbs in his wake. The silence he left behind was deafening. It was a physical thing, thick and heavy, pressing down on us. Christopher took a sip of his beer, his eyes wary now. He could feel it, the change in atmospheric pressure. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, more careful. This was the moment, the cliff edge. I could step back. I could nod, say I was just tired, and let the evening continue its charade. We could watch the movie. We could go to bed. We could pretend for another night, another week, forever. The vault door inside me was shrieking on its hinges, and all I had to do was stop pushing. But I couldn't. My fingers, cold and numb, found the receipt in my pocket. I didn't pull it out with a dramatic flourish. I simply placed it on the table between us, smoothing it out with my fingertips as if it were a precious artifact. I watched his face. His eyes dropped to it. I saw the confusion first, a quick furrow of his brow. Then recognition. It was a flash, so fast I would have missed it if I hadn't been studying him like a specimen under a microscope. It was followed by a swift, calculated blankness. A shutter slamming down. "What's this?" he asked, his tone neutral but a little too light, a little too casual. "I found it in your car." My own voice was flat, empty. "La Canzone Italiana sounds lovely." "I've never been." He picked it up, glanced at it, and gave a short, dismissive laugh. It was a terrible sound. "Oh, that. Yeah, I took Tim from accounting there. He's been going through that nasty divorce, needed to vent. Client write-off." It was a good lie, plausible, simple. It even had a thread of empathy woven into it. But he'd made one mistake. one tiny, fatal flaw in his story. Tim, I repeated, the name hanging in the greasy air between us. Tim, who is deathly allergic to garlic, who carries an EpiPen because even garlic powder could kill him. You took him to an Italian restaurant. The blankness on his face fractured. For a single, breathtaking second, I saw pure, unadulterated panic. It was there in the slight widening of his eyes, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he set his beer bottle down. It was the most honest thing I'd seen from him in months. He opened his mouth, closed it, swallowed. The gears were turning, spinning wildly, trying to find purchase on a new, better lie. "Vic," he began, his voice dropping into a lower, more placating register. The one he used when he was trying to talk me out of being upset about something. "It's not what you think." Those words. The cliché of it all was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. "What is it then, Christopher?" I asked, and the emptiness in my voice was gone, replaced by something sharp and brittle. "Enlighten me. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you had a very expensive, very romantic dinner for two on a night you told me you were working late. And you lied about who you were with. So tell me, what should I be thinking?" He looked trapped, cornered. The genial husband persona had evaporated, leaving behind a man who was just scared. He ran a hand through his hair. It was just dinner. With an old friend? "Sarah," I didn't ask, I stated it. The color drained from his face. That was all the confirmation I needed. It was a physical blow, a sucker punch to the solar plexus. I had to press my hands flat against the table to steady myself. "It's not an affair, Vic," he said, the words tumbling out now, desperate. "It's not like that. We're just talking, reconnecting. It's innocent." "Innocent?" The word was a whisper, laced with venom. Innocent people don't lie about who they're having dinner with. Innocent people don't hide receipts for $180 talks. Don't insult my intelligence, Christopher. From the living room, the opening credits of Liam's movie blared, a jarringly cheerful soundtrack to the end of my world. We both flinched. "I love you," he said, and it sounded like a plea, a last-ditch effort to salvage the unsalvageable. "I love you and Liam. This thing with Sarah, it doesn't mean anything." And that, perhaps, was the cruelest cut of all. That he could so casually dismiss something that was tearing the foundation of our life apart as something that didn't mean anything. That my pain, my devastation, was over a triviality. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man I had built my life with, the man I had trusted implicitly, he was a stranger. The familiar features of his face seemed to rearrange themselves into someone I didn't know. The vault door burst open. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "It meant enough to lie," I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the movie's noise. "It meant enough to betray me. It meant enough to risk all of this." I gestured around the kitchen, at our home, at the life we'd built. "So it meant something, Christopher, and until you can admit that to yourself, don't you dare say another word to me." I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I walked past the living room, where my innocent son was watching a cartoon, oblivious. I walked up the stairs, into our bedroom, and closed the door. I didn't lock it. The lock was meaningless now. The barriers that had been breached weren't physical. I stood in the center of the room, listening to the faint sounds of the movie below. The storm had broken. The avalanche had begun, and I was standing in the middle of it, completely, utterly alone. The house was a museum of a life that had suddenly ceased to exist. Every object, every piece of furniture, was a relic from a past era, a civilization that had been wiped out by a single cataclysm. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, careful not to disturb the dust, the silence, the perfect, agonizing stillness. Christopher was gone. He'd packed a suitcase 2 days after the conversation, his movements in our bedroom stiff and foreign. The air between us was a solid block of ice. There were no more arguments, no more tears, just a cold, procedural dismantling. "I'll be at the Marriott downtown," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. We should talk about what to tell Liam." What to tell Liam? Our 7-year-old son, whose universe was this house, his parents, his soccer ball. How do you explain that the foundation of his world was built on a fault line that had just split wide open? We told him together, sitting side by side on the sofa in the living room, a united front of lies and half-truths. We were a performance, a final, pathetic act of our marriage. "Hey, buddy," Christopher began, his voice too cheerful, too forced. You know how Mom and Dad love you very, very much, right? Liam, sensing the gravity in the air, just nodded, his small face serious. Well, sometimes grown-ups have a hard time getting along. And Dad is going to be staying at a hotel for a little while, just to give us some space. It's nothing you did, okay? It's absolutely not your fault. The words were textbook, ripped from some How to Talk to Your Kids About Divorce article I was sure he'd Googled. They sounded hollow and meaningless. Liam's lower lip began to tremble. Are you getting a divorce? He whispered, the word sounding too big, too final in his small voice. The silence that followed was an admission. I reached for his hand. We don't know yet, sweetheart, I said, the lie ash in my mouth. I did know. I had already called a lawyer. We just need some time to figure things out. He cried then, a quiet, heartbroken crying that was worse than any scream. He didn't understand the why, only the what. Daddy was leaving. The world was no longer safe. After Christopher left, the silence descended completely. It was my new constant companion. It followed me from room to room, pressing against my eardrums. I'd put on music, the TV, anything to fill the void, but the silence just swallowed the noise whole. My life became a series of grim, administrative tasks. Each one felt like another turn of a screw, fastening the lid on the coffin of my marriage. Task 1, find a lawyer. The office was all polished wood and expensive, tasteful art. Eleanor Vance, Esquire, sat across from me, her demeanor a perfect blend of empathy and razor-sharp efficiency. She asked questions in a calm, measured tone that felt violently at odds with their content. List of all joint assets, please. Do you have any evidence of infidelity? Texts, emails, receipts? What is your desired custody arrangement? I handed her the receipt from La Canzone Italiana. It looked absurdly flimsy in the formal setting, a sad little piece of paper that had started a war. She took it without comment and placed it in a file folder labeled Thorn. My name, my new identity, a client in a divorce. Task 2, change the locks. A burly man with kind eyes came and did it while I was at work. When I came home, the new keys felt cold and alien in my hand. They were a definitive statement. You are not welcome here anymore. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, listening to the empty house. It was mine now. Solely, utterly mine. The thought was terrifying. Task 3, the first solo school run. Liam was quiet in the backseat. The radio was off. The silence in the car was a physical weight. I saw the other parents in the drop-off line, couples in their cars, sharing a morning coffee, laughing. I saw them through a new lens now, the lens of the broken, the single, the left behind. I felt like I had a sign on my forehead. I pulled away from the curb, my hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2, performing normalcy for an audience of no one. Task 4, box his things. I didn't do it with rage. I didn't burn his possessions in the backyard. That would have required a heat I no longer possessed. I did it with a cold, clinical detachment, as if I were sorting through the effects of a deceased person. I started with the bathroom medicine cabinet. His expensive cologne, the hair gel he was so particular about, the extra razor blades. I put them all in a cardboard box labeled C. I moved to his side of the closet, emptying it of suits, shirts, shoes. Each item felt like it belonged to a stranger. The fabric held no scent of him anymore, just the faint smell of cedar from the closet. I was an archaeologist, cataloging the artifacts of a dead relationship. The lowest point came on a Tuesday evening. Liam was at a friend's house for a playdate, a mercy arranged by a mom who'd heard the news through the neighborhood gossip vine. The house was so silent I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I was in the garage, taping up the last box. There was nothing left to do. The administrative tasks were complete. All that was left was the feeling. It hit me then, a wave of such profound, crushing loneliness that it stole the breath from my lungs. It wasn't just about missing Christopher. It was the sheer, terrifying scope of the emptiness. The silence wasn't just an absence of sound, it was in presence. It was a void that threatened to swallow me whole. I sank down onto the cold concrete floor of the garage, surrounded by boxes containing the ghost of my husband, and I cried. Not the elegant tears of a movie heroine, but ragged, ugly, soundless sobs that racked my entire body. I cried for the loss of the future we'd planned. I cried for my son's broken heart. I cried for the woman I was, the woman who believed in promises, who trusted blindly. She was gone too, packed away in one of these boxes. I was alone. Truly, completely alone. And the silence was the only thing left to keep me company. The silence in the house had become a living thing, a parasitic entity that fed on my breath, my thoughts, my will. It followed me from room to room, a constant, suffocating reminder of the emptiness. I had become a ghost in my own home, haunting the spaces where a life used to be. The boxes in the garage were a monument to my failure. The lawyer's paperwork on the kitchen counter was a cold, clinical map of my dismantled future. One night, standing in the shower, the hot water doing nothing to thaw the permanent chill in my bones, I had a thought so clear and so terrifying it cut through the fog of grief. If I stay here, in this silence, I will disappear. The next morning, I dropped Liam off at school. His goodbye was still subdued, a quiet bye, Mom, instead of his usual energetic dash for the playground. His world had shrunk, and mine had become a prison of 4 walls and echoing rooms. I drove to the clinic on autopilot. The animals, with their uncomplicated needs and honest pain, were a relief. A Labrador puppy with a broken leg needed setting. I could focus on the precise alignment of bone, the feel of the cast setting, the puppy's grateful licks. It was a problem with a solution. My life was not. During my lunch break, I didn't eat. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dim light of my office, a portal to anywhere else. My fingers, acting on an impulse I didn't fully understand, typed 2 words into the search bar. Solo travel. The results were a barrage of vibrant, smiling women standing on mountain tops or laughing on pristine beaches. Number solo female travel. It looked like a fantasy, a world inhabited by people who were nothing like me. I was a ghost, a recently separated veterinarian from Colorado with a broken heart. I didn't belong there. I was about to close the laptop, to retreat back into the silence when I saw it. A link buried on the second page. Iceland, for those who need to get lost to find themselves. I clicked. The images were not of smiling women. They were of stark, brutal, unimaginable beauty. Black sand beaches being pounded by violent gray waves. Jagged glaciers under brooding, endless skies. Vast, empty landscapes of moss-covered lava rock that looked like another planet. It was raw, lonely, and utterly magnificent. It didn't promise happiness. It promised feeling. Something other than this numb, hollowed-out ache. It was the opposite of my sterile, silent house. It was the antithesis of my controlled, clinical life. Before I could talk myself out of it, my fingers were moving again, clicking through to a booking site. A solo trip, 1 week, Reykjavik, then a rental car to drive the southern coast. No plan, no itinerary, just going. My heart was hammering against my ribs. This was insanity. It was irresponsible. It was expensive. It was the dramatic haircut. The solo trip to Iceland with no plan the randomization had prescribed. It was the expression of my grief. I clicked purchase. The confirmation email hit my inbox with a soft, definitive ping. I sat there, staring at the screen, a wave of cold panic washing over me. What had I done? I was a mother, a professional. I didn't do things like this. I had to tell Christopher. It was a logistical necessity, a matter of co-parenting. I called him, my hand shaking. "Victoria," he answered, his voice cautious, formal. We were strangers negotiating a treaty. "I'm going away for a week," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I leave Saturday. I've already arranged for my mom to come stay with Liam. She'll do the school run. I'll send you the schedule." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the shock in his silence. This was not the Victoria he knew. The Victoria he knew would have never been this impulsive, this selfish. Going away? Where? Why? The questions were laced with disbelief and a hint of suspicion. "Iceland," I said, the word feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. "Iceland," he repeated, the disbelief morphing into something that sounded almost like derision. "What's in Iceland, Vic? What are you running from?" The old me would have wilted under that tone. The old me would have felt the need to justify, to explain, to seek his understanding. But the old me was the one who found the receipt. The old me was the one who got left behind. "I'm not running from anything, Christopher," I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was the firmest it had been in weeks. "I'm walking towards something else." I hung up before he could say another word. The days until my departure were a blur of practicalities and simmering terror. I packed hiking boots and a waterproof jacket. items that felt like a costume for a person I wasn't. I wrote detailed notes for my mother. I held Liam extra tight every night, promising him I would be back soon, that I just needed an adventure. The morning of the flight, I stood in my empty hallway, my suitcase by the door. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. It was no longer a verdict, it was a canvas. A terrifying, blank canvas. I was not okay. I was broken and scared, and so far out of my depth I could barely breathe. But for the first time since I'd found that damned piece of paper, I had made a choice that was entirely, unequivocally, for me. I was choosing the unknown over the unbearable familiar. I was choosing to step into the storm. The silence in Iceland was different. It wasn't the hollow, suffocating silence of my empty house. This was a vast, ancient, and roaring silence. It was the sound of wind screaming across a black sand desert, of ice cracking in a millennia-old glacier, of water thundering over a cliff face with a force that vibrated deep in my chest. It was a silence that didn't swallow sound. It dwarfed it, made it insignificant. I stood on Reynisfjara, the black sand beach, the Atlantic wind whipping my hair into a frenzied Medusa's crown. The basalt columns rose from the sand like a petrified organ pipe, playing a symphony for the gods. The waves were violent, gray, and unforgiving. Warning signs with stark silhouettes of people being swept out to sea dotted the path. This place did not care about my heartbreak. It was beautiful, and it was utterly indifferent to my existence. I had been here for 3 days. 3 days of driving a tiny rental car on empty roads that cut through landscapes so stark and dramatic they felt like a dream. I had barely spoken to anyone. I'd order coffee with a nod and a smile, check into guest houses with mumbled pleasantries. My voice felt rusty from disuse. The first day, I'd done what I thought I was supposed to do. I'd visited the Golden Circle, seen the geysers erupt, stood at the rift between tectonic plates. I'd taken the pictures, but I'd felt nothing. It was like watching a magnificent documentary about a planet I wasn't on. The numbness had followed me here. It was a suit I couldn't take off. On the second day, the panic set in. What was I doing? I was alone in a foreign country, driving through a barren wasteland with nothing but my own thoughts for company. My thoughts, which were a broken record of betrayal, loss, and a chilling fear of the future. I was paying thousands of dollars to be miserably lonely in a more scenic location. I almost turned the car around and headed back to the airport. But I didn't. I kept driving south towards Vic. The landscape grew more severe, more beautiful, more punishing. And now, on this beach, something shifted. The wind was so strong it felt like it could scour me clean, blow the dust of my old life right off my bones. I walked towards the water, my boots sinking into the volcanic sand. I stood there, letting the mist from the crashing waves coat my face, mingling with the tears I hadn't even realized were falling. I wasn't crying for Christopher. Not really. I was crying for the sheer, terrifying scale of it all. My pain, which had felt like the biggest thing in the universe, was a tiny, insignificant speck in this vastness. My failed marriage was a blink in the life of this glacier. My betrayal was a single grain of black sand on this endless beach. The thought wasn't depressing. It was liberating. The world was so much bigger than my suffering. I screamed. I opened my mouth and I screamed into the wind, a raw, guttural sound that was ripped from my throat and carried away instantly, swallowed by the roar of the ocean. I screamed out the anger, the humiliation, the grief for the future I'd lost. I screamed until my throat was raw and my lungs burned. No one could hear me. The wind stole the sound, the waves crashed on, completely unmoved. I fell to my knees on the sand, spent, gasping for air. The emotional purge left me shaking. But the numbness was gone. In its place was a cold, clear emptiness. Not the lonely emptiness of my house, but the empty clarity of a wiped-clean slate. I thought of my hands. My capable, veterinarian's hands that could suture a wound and comfort a frightened animal. They were buried in the black sand of Iceland now. They were strong. They had held things together. They could build something new. I didn't find happiness in Iceland. I didn't find myself in some cliched, epiphanic moment. What I found was resilience. I found the simple, animal knowledge that I could be alone in a terrifying and magnificent place, and I would not break. I could feel the full, devastating force of the pain, and I would still be able to get up, brush the sand off my knees, and drive back to the guest house. I stayed on that beach until the weak Arctic sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and rose. I was cold, I was hungry, and my heart still ached. But for the first time in months, the ache was clean. It was a wound being cleaned out, not one being infected. I had come to Iceland to get lost. But as I trudged back to my car, my face chapped by the wind and salt, I realized I had come here to be found by the one person I had abandoned completely. Myself. The version of me that existed before I was Christopher's wife, before I was Liam's mother. The version that was just Victoria. A woman who could scream into a storm and survive it. The road back to Reykjavik the next day felt different. The landscape was no longer intimidating, it was affirming. I rolled down the window, letting the cold, clean air fill the car. I didn't need music. The silence was enough. The Colorado air was thin and crisp, a familiar dryness after the damp, oceanic breath of Iceland. My house was still silent, but the silence had changed. It was no longer an accusatory presence. It was a space waiting to be filled. The boxes in the garage were still there, but they were just boxes now, not relics. I had returned a different woman. Not a healed woman, not a finished one, but a woman who had stared into a glacial fissure and seen her own reflection in the ice, cracked, ancient, and still standing. The first Monday back, after dropping Liam at school, I didn't go to the clinic. I'd booked the week off. Instead, I drove to a different place. A place on the outskirts of Boulder, where the flatlands began to crumple and fold into the mighty Rockies. The trailhead for the Mesa Trail was busy with a Monday morning energy. Serious hikers with telescoping poles, joggers with determined looks, and a few tourists looking lost. I felt a fraud. My hiking boots were new, their soles still pristine and unscuffed. My backpack was filled with more water than I could possibly need and a sense of profound uncertainty. This was my randomized path to self-development. Hiking. It felt both too simple and impossibly hard. I stood by my car, watching people flow onto the trail and disappear into the trees. My heart thumped a nervous rhythm. This was it. The first, tangible step. Not a dramatic escape to another continent, but a quiet, consistent commitment to myself. In Iceland, I had proven I could survive a cataclysm. Here, in Colorado, I had to prove I could build a life. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the path. The first half-mile was a battle against my own body. My lungs, used to the altitude of my suburban clinic, burned. My calves protested the incline. My mind, freed from the immediate distractions of travel, began its familiar, miserable loop. What are you doing? You're a veterinarian, not a mountain climber. You're alone. Everyone here has someone. He's probably with her right now. The thoughts were like flies, buzzing and persistent. I kept walking, my eyes on the dusty toes of my boots. Step, drag, then something shifted. I had to stop to catch my breath, leaning my hands on my knees. When I looked up, I was forced to see, really see. The sun filtered through the ponderosa pines, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air smelled of warm stone, dry pine needles, and sage. A chickadee chirped from a branch above me, a cheerful, indifferent sound. I was surrounded by a world that was simply being. It wasn't concerned with my divorce, my pain, my failures. It just was. I started walking again, but slower this time. I wasn't trying to conquer the trail or prove anything. I was just moving through it. I began to notice details. The intricate architecture of a spiderweb spanning between two bushes, glittering with dew. The stubborn tenacity of a wildflower growing from a crack in a boulder. The way the light hit the flatiron rock formations in the distance, setting them on fire with morning gold. The mental flies stopped buzzing. The loop of painful thoughts broke. My mind, for the first time in what felt like forever, was quiet. Not empty, but present. It was filled with the sound of my own breathing, the crunch of my boots on gravel, the whisper of the wind. I reached a lookout point. The view was breathtaking. Boulder spread out below, and beyond it the endless plains stretched to the horizon. I was small, so incredibly small. But for the first time, that felt like a privilege, not a curse. To be a small, living part of something so vast and beautiful. I sat on a sun-warmed rock and drank my water. I didn't think about Christopher. I didn't think about the lawyer's emails waiting for me at home. I thought about the texture of the rock beneath me, the taste of the water, the feeling of the sun on my face. This was the transformation, not a sudden, dramatic event, but this deliberate, plodding, step-by-step choosing of the present moment over the painful past. This was the activity becoming a habit. This was me, building a new baseline for my life, one breath, one step at a time. The hike back down was easier. My body had found its rhythm, my mind was quiet. I wasn't happy, not exactly, but I was engaged. I was participating in my own life again. I drove home, my muscles aching with a pleasant, honest fatigue. The silence in the house welcomed me. It felt like my silence now. I had brought a piece of the mountain's peace back with me. I picked up Liam from school. His face lit up when he saw me. "Mom, you're all red." "I went for a hike, buddy," I said, and the words felt good and true in my mouth. "Cool, did you see any bears?" "No bears," I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised me. "Just some really cool rocks." That night, after Liam was in bed, I didn't sink onto the couch and drown in the silence. I went online and found a local women's hiking group that met on weekends. I stared at the Join Us button for a full minute, my old insecurities rising up. You won't fit in, they'll all be experts. But I remembered the feeling of the sun on the rock. The quiet mind. I clicked the button. It was just a click. But it felt like another step on the trail. The path was no longer about escaping who I was. It was about becoming who I was going to be. The transformation was not in the destination, but in the dirt. It was under my fingernails, ground into the fabric of my hiking socks, a fine, red dust that seemed to permanently coat my hiking boots. My body was a map of this new terrain. A constellation of bruises on my shins from misjudged steps, muscles in my calves and thighs that had hardened from pleating masses into reliable cords of strength. A tan line on my wrists from my watch strap that was a badge of hours spent under the open sky. The trail was no longer a place I visited. It was a language I was learning to speak. Every weekend, without fail, I met the women from the hiking group. Susan, a retired teacher with knees of iron and a bottomless supply of trail mix. Chloe, a software engineer who found silence in the rhythm of her own breathing. Maria, who had lost her husband to cancer 2 years prior and whose quiet strength was a beacon. We were a patchwork quilt of stories, stitched together by the path beneath our feet. We didn't need to talk about our pain. The shared effort, the grunt of a difficult ascent, the shared wonder at a hawk circling overhead, that was our conversation. I'd graduated from the well-trodden mesa trail to more challenging routes. The Flatirons, with their sheer, sloping faces. Royal Arch, a grueling climb that rewarded you with a view that stole your breath more effectively than the altitude. My world had shrunk to the essentials. The weight of my pack, the grip of my boots on scree, the next switchback, the next sip of water. One Saturday, we were on the Bear Peak Trail, a relentless ascent that I'd failed to complete a month ago, turning back with burning lungs and a defeated spirit. This time was different. My breathing, though heavy, had a steady rhythm I'd learned to trust. My legs pushed on with a familiar, aching certainty. I wasn't thinking about Christopher. I wasn't replaying the painful scenes in my head. My mind was gloriously, utterly consumed by the physicality of the moment. The calculation of where to place my foot on a rocky step, the feel of the sun on the back of my neck, the sound of my own heart, not pounding in panic, but working, beating a strong, steady drum of effort. I reached the summit not with a burst of exhausted relief, but with a steady, powerful final step. The group was scattered along the peak, taking photos, eating snacks. I found a flat rock off to the side and sat, pulling my knees to my chest. The world fell away below me. Boulder was a toy town, the plains a hazy, endless carpet. The wind up here was clean and sharp. I closed my eyes and just felt it. Felt the solid rock beneath me. Felt the tired, singing strength in my own body. Felt the simple, profound fact of my own presence in this high, wild place. This was mastery. Not over the mountain would always be greater, but over myself. Mastery over the chaos that had once ruled my mind. I had channeled the hurricane of my grief into this single, focused upward motion. I had taken the pain and used it as fuel. I had built an altar of endurance, not to forget him, but to remember myself. Maria came and sat beside me, wordlessly handing me a wedge of orange. We sat in comfortable silence, sucking on the sweet, acidic segments, looking out at the world we had climbed above. "You're a natural," she said after a while, her voice quiet. You move like you've always belonged here." Her words settled in me, warm and certain. She was right. I did belong here, not just on this mountain, but in this skin. The skin of a woman who was strong, a woman who was capable, a woman who could be alone and not be lonely. The descent was always harder on the knees, but easier on the heart. The work was done. The view was internalized. As we drove back into town, the real world began to seep back in: the errands, the emails from my lawyer, the co-parenting schedule with Christopher. But it landed on a different person. When I picked up Liam, he looked at me, my face flushed with sun and effort, and said, "You look happy, Mom." I wasn't, not in the simple way he meant, but I was something better. I was whole. I was no longer a missing piece of a broken puzzle. I was my own complete picture. That night, after Liam was asleep, I didn't look at old photos or dwell on the past. I opened a map of Colorado and traced a line with my finger. A longer trail, a multi-day hike. The Colorado Trail, perhaps. It was a crazy thought, a thrilling one. The path forward was no longer about healing from what was broken. It was about building on what was now strong. Happiness alone is a quiet thing. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks or dramatic fanfare. It seeps into the cracks of your life slowly, like the first light of dawn, painting everything in a softer, gentler hue. My life had found its new rhythm, a melody composed solely for me. The weekends were for the mountains, for the burn in my muscles and the clarity of the high-altitude air. But the weekdays, the quiet evenings after Liam was asleep, those belonged to a different kind of peace. Our house, my house, no longer felt like a museum or a tomb. I had rearranged the furniture, not with any vengeful energy, but with a simple desire for a new perspective. The sofa now faced the large window that looked out onto the backyard, where a stubborn aspen tree was finally showing the first hints of golden yellow. I'd bought a ridiculously plush armchair in a deep emerald green and placed it in a corner with a good reading light. It was my chair. It didn't hold the ghost of another person's weight. One such evening, I found myself there, a book open but unread on my lap, a cup of tea steaming on the side table. The only sound was the gentle hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle downstairs. Liam was asleep upstairs, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm monitored by the baby monitor. I looked around the room. This was my kingdom. This quiet, orderly, peaceful space. And the most astonishing feeling settled over me. I was not lonely, I was content. The frantic need to fill the silence was gone. I could sit in it, breathe it in, and feel it nourish me. The grief was still there, but it was a scar now, not an open wound. A part of my history, not my present. My happiness was in the small, sovereign choices of my daily life. It was in cooking a meal that I wanted, without considering another adult's preferences. It was in leaving a project half-finished on the dining table without apology. It was in watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures at full volume, simply because I found it fascinating. It was in the text message thread with my hiking group, planning the next adventure. It was in the satisfied exhaustion after a long day at the clinic, where I had successfully removed a tumor from a beloved family cat. It was in the sound of Liam's laughter, which was returning to its full, unfettered joy. Christopher was a part of this life, but a managed one. Our interactions were cordial, brief, and entirely focused on Liam. The divorce paperwork was progressing, a dry, administrative untangling of a life that had already emotionally unraveled. Seeing him no longer sent me into a tailspin. He was just a man I used to know. The love I had for him felt like a story I'd read long ago, poignant but finished. I picked up my tea and took a sip. It was the perfect temperature. The leaves on the aspen tree outside shivered in the evening breeze. This was it. This was the happiness I had been certain was lost to me forever. It wasn't the explosive joy of a new romance or the complacent comfort of a long marriage. It was something more profound, more deeply earned. It was the happiness of self-possession, the unshakable knowledge that I was enough, that my company was sufficient, that my own thoughts were good company. I had built a life that could withstand silence. I had learned to be my own anchor. The doorbell rang. The sound was so foreign, so unexpected in my quiet evening ritual that I jumped, sloshing tea onto my sweatpants. Liam was asleep. I wasn't expecting anyone. A flicker of old anxiety, was it Christopher? Had something happened? Was quickly quashed by the new, steady core of myself. It was probably a lost delivery driver. I set my cup down and padded to the door, not bothering to look through the peephole. I pulled it open. A man stood on my porch, backlit by the porch light. He wasn't Christopher. He was a stranger. He looked flustered. In his arms, he held a small, wriggling bundle of golden fur. A puppy. "I am so sorry to bother you," he said, his voice a warm, slightly embarrassed baritone. "This is incredibly awkward. I'm your new neighbor, just moved in 2 doors down. Leo. And this little escape artist." He hoisted the puppy, who licked his chin, "Dug under my fence about 5 minutes ago and made a beeline for your yard. I saw your light on, and I hope I'm not interrupting." The puppy, a little golden retriever with comically large paws, turned its head and looked at me. It let out a tiny, playful yip. I looked from the puppy to the man, Leo. He had kind eyes, crinkled at the corners with a mixture of apology and amusement. He held the squirming puppy with a gentle competence. A smile touched my lips. Not the performative smile I'd mastered during the worst of it, but a real, genuine one. "It's no interruption," I said, my voice calm and steady in the quiet night. "I'm Victoria, and it seems you've already met my backyard." The moment hung in the air, light and unburdened. It was just a neighbor. And a puppy. But it felt like the first note of a new, unexpected song, one that had just begun to play in the quiet symphony of my contentment. Leo and the puppy, who he'd introduced as Bear, became a pleasant, low-frequency hum in the background of my life. A wave across the lawn when we were both getting the mail. A brief chat at the neighborhood block party, where I learned he was an architect who'd moved from Portland for a major mountain-focused project. He was easy to talk to, with a calm, grounded energy that felt like a cool cloth on a fevered brow. He never asked prying questions, and his smile never held a trace of pity, only a genuine, quiet warmth. The women in my hiking group, of course, noticed. The architect with the puppy, 2 doors down. "Victoria, that's not a meet-cute, that's a Hallmark movie," Susan had said, elbowing me playfully as we'd packed up our cars after a hike. I just laughed it off. I wasn't ready. My hard-won contentment felt like a delicate ecosystem, and I had no desire to introduce a new, unpredictable variable. A week later, the hiking group was tackling a new, more remote trail near Estes Park. The plan was ambitious, a full-day loop that promised stunning views of a secluded valley. Maria had printed the maps, but in the pre-dawn frenzy of meeting up, they'd been hastily folded, a crease running directly through the most crucial junction. We'd been hiking for 3 hours, the air growing thinner and cooler. The trail was less defined here, crisscrossed with game paths and rocky scrambles. We reached a clearing where the path seemed to fork in 2 unmarked directions. "Okay," Maria said, unfolding the map with a frown. "According to this, we should bear left, but this line here is completely obscured by the fold. Does that squiggle mean a river or a cliff?" We huddled around the map, a committee of confusion. The confident energy of the morning began to fray at the edges. Arguments broke out. "It's definitely left, see the elevation markers?" "No, those markers are for the other peak. Right looks more traveled." "That's just deer traffic. We're going to end up adding 5 miles?" The bickering was a tiny spark on the dry tinder of my old anxiety. I felt a familiar tension creeping into my shoulders. Being lost, the group fracturing, it felt like a metaphor for things I'd worked so hard to move past. And then a voice cut through the debate, calm and steady. "Pardon me, folks, didn't mean to eavesdrop." We all turned. A solo hiker had come up the trail behind us. He lowered his backpack, and as he took off his sunglasses, I felt a jolt of recognition. It was Leo. He offered a small, easy smile. "I'm familiar with this loop. That right fork peters out into a scree field about half a mile up. It's a nasty climb with no payoff. The left one is the correct path. It dips down before climbing again, which is why it's not obvious from here." He said it not with a know-it-all swagger, but with a simple, confident authority. He'd read the land itself, not the flawed map. Maria let out a sigh of relief. "You are a lifesaver, thank you." "Happy to help," he said, his eyes scanning our group. They landed on me, and his smile warmed a degree. "Victoria. Fancy meeting you here." "Small world," I said, my own tension easing in the face of his unflappable calm. The randomized parameter, he's the guide on a hiking trip, was unfolding not with dramatic fanfare, but with this simple, helpful certainty. "Mind if I tag along for this next bit?" he asked the group. Make sure you don't get betrayed by another poorly folded map. The group eagerly agreed. He fell into step beside me as we took the left fork, which, as promised, began a gradual, well-defined descent. Quite the rescue, I said, a little teasingly. He chuckled. Just a happy coincidence. I try to get out here every Sunday. Clears the head for the week ahead. He glanced at me. Although, from what I just saw, you looked like you could have handled it. You all did. I just provided a data point. He wasn't patronizing. He was giving us credit, acknowledging our capability while simply offering his help. It was incredibly attractive. We walked together, the group spreading out ahead of us. The conversation flowed as easily as it had on my porch. We talked about trails we loved, the arrogance of thinking a map could ever truly capture a place, the simple joy of a peanut butter sandwich eaten on a mountaintop. He asked about my work at the clinic and listened with genuine interest to a story about a tricky dental extraction on a ferret. He never once asked about my past, about a husband, about why I was here with a group of women and not a partner. He was present, with me, with the trail. His patience wasn't a passive waiting, it was an active, engaged calm. He was utterly unruffled by the misdirection, by the group's anxiety, by anything. It was the positive trait, manifested right in front of me, incredibly patient and calm in stressful situations. At the summit, we all shared our snacks. Leo produced a bag of outrageously good homemade granola. As we sat looking out at the vast, wind-scoured valley, our shoulders nearly touching, I felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't the roaring need of new infatuation. It was quieter, warmer. A spark of curiosity, a feeling of alignment. The hike back was filled with laughter and easy conversation. When we reached the trailhead, the group exchanged numbers with Leo, declaring him an honorary member. As we were packing our cars, he approached me. I had a really nice time today, Victoria. Me too, I said and meant it. Thanks for saving us from a long walk off a short cliff. Anytime. He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a card. It was simple, just his name and number. I know you've got a full life, but if you ever want to tackle another trail without cartographic hazards, I'd enjoy the company. No pressure. He gave me that calm smile, got into his sensible Subaru, and drove away. I looked down at the card in my hand. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was an invitation, an option, placed gently into the palm of my new, contented life. I slipped it into my pocket. I didn't know what I would do with it. But for the first time, the thought of finding out didn't feel like a threat to my peace. It felt like a possibility. The business card sat on my kitchen counter for a week. It wasn't a deliberate test, it was just there. A small, white rectangle next to the fruit bowl. I'd see it while making Liam's breakfast, while packing my lunch, while wiping down the counters at the end of the day. It became a part of the landscape of my new life, neither intrusive nor ignored. The following Sunday, my hiking group was taking a weekend off. The house was quiet. Liam was with Christopher for their scheduled weekend. The silence, once my enemy, then my comfort, now felt spacious. It had room in it. I picked up my phone. The text I typed was simple, casual, no grand pronouncements. Hey Leo, it's Victoria from the Trail Rescue. My group is off this weekend. If your offer still stands, I'd be up for a hike. I hit send before I could overthink it. His reply was almost immediate. Offer definitely stands. How about Mayor's Gulch? It's a good one, not too crowded. I can pick up a map, or we can just wing it. The winking emoji he added made me smile. He'd remembered. An hour later, we were at the trailhead. The air was cool and carried the promise of autumn. Leo handed me a thermos. Coffee. Black, right? I noticed you didn't take anything in it at the block party. The simple act of observation, devoid of expectation, sent a small, warm shock through me. Thanks, you're a lifesaver, again. We started up the trail. The dynamic was different from the group hike. Quieter, more focused. The easy conversation was still there, but it was punctuated by longer stretches of comfortable silence, filled only by the sound of our footfalls and the chatter of squirrels. After about a mile, Leo stopped and pulled a map from his backpack. He unfolded it with a flourish. It was, true to the randomized parameter, comically poorly folded, a chaotic origami of trails and contour lines. All right, navigator, he said, handing it to me with a grin. Your turn. I think we're here, maybe. I took the crinkled paper. It was a mess. I held it up, turning it this way and that, trying to align the squiggly lines with the actual landscape. According to this, I said, squinting, that ridge over there should be a river, and I'm pretty sure that's not right. Leo peered over my shoulder, his presence warm and solid but not intrusive. Maybe it's a river of rock? A very slow-moving one, I deadpanned. We both laughed. It was a silly, simple moment, but it broke down the last of the formalities. We were two people, slightly lost with a bad map, and it was perfectly okay. The pressure was off. This wasn't a date, it was an adventure, a shared puzzle. I took the lead, making executive decisions based on the general direction and the position of the sun. I say we head towards that stand of aspens. The map kinda has a cluster of trees there. A sound navigational strategy, Captain, Leo said, falling into step behind me, using the very trees themselves, revolutionary. His teasing was gentle, respectful. He never took the map from me, never asserted his obvious greater knowledge of the area. He let me lead us on our slightly meandering path, offering suggestions only when I asked. His patience was a tangible thing, a safety net that allowed me to be confidently unsure. We eventually found the main trail again, and the view from the top was worth every wrong turn. We sat on a sun-drenched ledge, sharing the coffee and the granola he'd brought. You know, he said, looking out at the vista, I think I prefer your route. We saw way more interesting things being lost. We weren't lost, I corrected him, smiling. We were discovery adjacent. He laughed, a warm, rich sound that echoed slightly in the thin air. Discovery adjacent, I like that. The conversation turned deeper, easier. We talked about our lives before Colorado. He spoke about the pressures of architecture, the desire to create things that felt organic, that belonged to the landscape rather than conquering it. I talked about the clinic, the joy and heartbreak of veterinary work, the silent language of animals. I found myself telling him about Iceland, about the screaming into the wind. He listened, truly listened, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just nodded and said, "It sounds like you gave the pain back to the elements. That's powerful." He saw it. He saw the strength it took, not just the brokenness. On the hike down, the poorly folded map was forgotten in my pocket. We didn't need it. The path was clear. We talked and laughed, the rhythm of our steps and our conversation falling into a perfect, easy sync. When he dropped me off at my house, the autumn sun was casting long shadows. The day was over, but it didn't feel like an ending. I had a really great time, Victoria, he said, his hand resting on the steering wheel. Discovery adjacency and all. Me too, Leo. Thanks for the coffee. And the terrible map. Anytime. I got out of the car and walked to my door. I turned and waved before going inside. He waited until I was inside before pulling away. A small, considerate act. I leaned against the closed door, the quiet of my house wrapping around me. But it felt different. It didn't feel empty. It felt like it was waiting to be filled with the echo of laughter, with the memory of a shared, silly joke, with the possibility of a voice other than my own. I wasn't the same woman who had screamed into the Icelandic wind. I was stronger. I was whole. And for the first time, the thought of sharing that wholeness with someone didn't feel like a risk. It felt like the next logical step on a beautiful, unfolding trail. The air in the mountain cabin was filled with the scent of pine and roasting chicken. It was a crisp, clear Colorado evening, the kind where the sky turns a deep, bottomless indigo and the first stars appear like pinpricks in a velvet curtain. Through the large picture window, the lights of Boulder twinkled far below, a distant galaxy. Inside, the scene was one of beautiful, chaotic warmth. The cabin was ours, mine, Leo's, and Liam's. The randomized parameter had manifested perfectly. A modern mountain cabin, a blend of Leo's architectural genius and my need for a hearth, a true home built into the side of the mountain we both loved. Liam, now 9, was setting the table with a solemn concentration that made me smile. He was explaining the proper placement of a fork to a captivated audience. A gangly golden retriever puppy, Bear's successor, who wagged his tail at every word. Leo was at the stove, orchestrating the final stages of dinner. He moved with that same calm efficiency he'd had on the trail, a quiet captain in the kitchen. I was beside him, mashing potatoes, my shoulder brushing against his arm as we moved in our familiar, practiced dance. This was our ritual, our shared activity, though it had evolved from hiking with a poorly folded map to cooking dinner together in their mountain cabin. It was still an adventure, often with comical missteps, burnt garlic bread, a salad overdressed beyond recognition, but it was ours. It was the foundation of our new family. The framed photo on the mantelpiece told the whole story. It was a picture from our small wedding ceremony just a year ago. Liam stood between us, beaming, holding the rings. We were surrounded by my hiking group, Susan, Chloe, Maria, all wearing ridiculous hiking boots with their dresses. And in the foreground, on a chair, sat the guest of honor, the comically poorly folded map from our first solo hike, framed under glass. We'd built this. Not from the ashes of my old life, but from the new materials we'd gathered together. Trust, patience, and a tremendous amount of laughter. "Okay, crew," Leo announced, lifting the roasting pan. "Chicken is secured. Potatoes?" "Mashed and magnificent," I said, handing him the bowl. We brought the food to the table, a feast under the soft glow of the pendant lights. As we sat down, Liam looked between us, his face serious. "I have an announcement," he said, in the tone he used for very important matters. We both gave him our full attention. "I've decided," he proclaimed, "that Bear JR is a good boy, but he is not a good sous chef. He tried to eat the carrots." Leo nodded gravely. "A critical flaw in any kitchen staff. We'll put him on cleanup duty instead." Liam giggled, the sound echoing warmly in the wooden room. As we passed the plates around, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text notification lit up the screen. It was from Christopher. It was his weekend to have Liam, and it was just a logistical question about pickup time. I felt no pang, no twist of old pain, just a simple, administrative recognition. He was a part of Liam's life, and that was okay. He was a chapter that was fully, peacefully closed. Leo's eyes flicked to the phone, then back to me. There was no jealousy in his gaze, no insecurity, only a quiet understanding. He trusted me, he trusted us. He reached under the table and squeezed my hand, a simple, grounding touch that said, "I'm here. This is us." This was the happy ending, but it wasn't an ending at all. It was a continuous, evolving beginning. It wasn't the frantic, desperate happiness of something new and fragile. It was the deep, resonant joy of something built to last. It was in the simple act of sharing a meal, in the warmth of Leo's hand on mine, in the sound of my son's laughter, in the contented sigh of the dog at our feet. We were a family, forged not from blood alone, but from choice, from patience, from a shared love of terrible maps and beautiful trails. We had a past, both together and apart, and we had a future, unwritten but eagerly anticipated, one shared meal, one hike, one quiet evening at a time. I looked around the table, at the faces illuminated by the soft light set against the backdrop of the mountains I had learned to call my own. I was Victoria, a veterinarian, a mother, a wife, a hiker. I was whole. I was home.